Hello, my name is Jem Baldwin. I'm here at Edmonds Community College conducting a preliminary interview with Jennifer Stuller in preparation for the talk that she is going to be giving at our Blackbox Theater at 7 p.m. on March 9th. This talk is free and open to the public as part of our Conversations in the Humanities series. The title of Jennifer's talk is Using Their Powers for Good: How Geektivists, Geek Grrls, and Gaymers are Creating More Inclusive Communities. We're very excited to have Jennifer coming, and if you're ready, Jen, I'd like to begin with a couple of questions.
Absolutely, and I just want to say I'm looking forward to returning to the Blackbox Theater. I had a great time last time.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, can you start by telling us who are these new geeks that you're going to be talking about, and what is new? How are they different than the old geeks?
I think what we're seeing a lot in geek culture is an evolution of the culture. And instead of, sort of the stereotype that we have in the American cultural consciousness of the comic book guy from The Simpsons, what we're starting to see is more women, more people of color, more LGBTQ folk, and they've always been there. They just haven't really, and they've always driven geek culture. They just haven't necessarily been part of the cultural imagination. And now that we have social media, they're finding each other, and they're creating these new communities where they can critique and celebrate and come together in community.
Okay, wonderful. Can you give me some examples of how these new communities are being created and what sort of means and methods are being employed to develop this change and inclusivity?
Absolutely. So I first noticed this growing zeitgeist about 5 years ago, and I knew that there were other geek women out there, but I couldn't really find them. And then I started to see them online. So that's one place where they're finding each other, is online, which has completely changed the game. And what geeks, Geek Grrls, blurs, which are black nerds, Gaymers, which are Gaymers, like in my presentation, they're finding each other online, and they're using not just social media to connect, but they're using social media to spread memes that are consciousness raising. They're using hashtag activism. They're using their own bodies through costuming and through performance, like nerdy burlesque, to perform fan fiction, to change our ideas about who a geek is, what they look like, and what spaces they can fill. And they're also using crowd funding to create new convention spaces, like BentCon in Los Angeles, which is a gay-centric geek con. FlameCon in Brooklyn just happened for the first time this past year, which was put on through a Kickstarter by Geeks Out, an organization for LGBTQ geeks. And then Geek Grrl Con here in Seattle is 5 years old. I'm a co-founder of that, and we put on our first convention in 2011 with 2,500 attendees coming to celebrate women in geekdom. And just this past fall, we had our 5th annual convention with over 8,500 people. So it's really fascinating to me to see how geek culture is evolving and who is coming out and how they are using both their fandom and their identity politics or social politics to sort of create new things.
Okay, well, that's all so exciting and interesting. Are you able to talk to me about what sorts of things these Geek Grrls and Gaymers are working against, or any kind of resistance that's being encountered from within the sort of old guard of the geek community, if you will?
Absolutely. I think most people are, receptive to, or I would hope most people are receptive to sort of new people coming in and joining the ranks of geekdom. But there is a tension there, as there is when any subculture sort of becomes hip. And there's a fear that this thing that you are mocked for is now sort of taken over by fair weather fans, right? Like when the Seahawks, take for example sports.
Sure.
When they were in the Super Bowl, this idea that anybody who was interested in the Super Bowl games weren't real fans. They hadn't been paying attention the whole time. But I think that vilifying enthusiasm, I don't like it. I don't care for vilifying enthusiasm. I want to encourage enthusiasm. So, take for example Geek Girl Con. We have a strict policy of no geek cred. If you don't know about a fandom, doesn't matter. If you want to come and play with us and you have respect, you are welcome to be there. Come play with us. Come meet new friends. We find a lot of people coming to the con who didn't feel like they were able to say, I'm a nerd, or claim geekdom, or claim a fandom, because they've been marginalized and oppressed by being told they didn't know enough about something. You see these new geeks fighting back against harassment in convention spaces, which is a huge problem at some of the larger, more established cons. And so you have groups like Geeks for Consent going out and using the tools that they've learned through anti-street harassment initiatives and advocating for strong anti-harassment policies within the geek space so that women who are in costume aren't being photographed without their permission and having nasty comments put online, or being touched by strangers because they're wearing something like that may be considered a skimpy superhero costume. Mm-hmm. That wearing that is not necessarily consent for other people's behavior. So advocating for some autonomy and agency in these spaces, because everybody should be able to go and have a good time. And then you see people like the Harry Potter Initiative, which is a formal global organization using the stories that we love, the stories that speak to us, to teach activist techniques to a new generation. So they're harnessing the power of stories for social change. So I think that all of this is just really exciting. And even when there are sort of dark underbellies of this resistance to change, like you said, you see a lot of this currently in the gaming world. I think that there are people who are fighting back in ways that are positive, that they are continuing to embrace the culture and move geek culture forward to a place that is progressive and inclusive.
It sure sounds like it. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of connection with, hopefully, sort of grassroots social movements that are taking place within various different subcultures.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a real DIY movement, a real DIY aspect to it, a real do-it-yourself aspect to it. There's actually a great book called Do It Anyway. It's about the new generation of activists. And so people are taking these maker philosophies that are very common in early fan communities, right? And this sort of sharing of fan phenomena that people make, and grassroots organizing. Yeah, I think that was a really smart connection there. That Geek Girl Con would not exist if it weren't for social media. It began as a word of mouth organization and started on Twitter and with a blog post. And then it just grew and grew and grew. So, yeah, very grassroots geek culture.
Right. That's great. It sounds like gaining momentum as well. Jen, so my last question, the question I want to close with is, I'm hoping you will give our audience just an idea of where you come to this in terms of your own personal history.
Absolutely. So I've always been a geek. I've always sort of claimed a nerd and geek identity. I was very bookish as a child. The things you think of as being stereotypical. I was very bookish as a child, very quiet. I grew up as a Gen Xer, watching a lot of the sort of cult television shows of the late 70s and early 80s. The Incredible Hulk, Wonder Woman, Battlestar Galactica. I watched old Star Trek and Twilight Zone with my dad, and so thought a lot about these modern mythology stories that were being told. And growing up in the 80s, collectible toys were a very big thing for us. And then when I got to high school, I was in the drama club. So I've always sort of gravitated towards things that were sort of categorized as being misfits or outcasts. And then when I started going to these conventions, especially the really big ones, I did not see a lot of female presence there. I didn't see women on stage the way that I wanted to. I didn't see them necessarily being represented in pop culture or tech industries like I wanted to. And so with all of these co-founders of Geek Girl Con, we all wanted to advocate to make these spaces. And I've been really lucky over the past 5 years to not just participate in creating a geek feminist activist movement here in Seattle, but I've been able to do that in tandem with my Geek Girl community online, so in a global way as well. And I've also been able to talk about geek activism in exciting settings like through Humanities Washington, through the Whedon Studies Association. So I've become very passionate about what geek activism looks like and doing it in a way that is passionate, that is fun, that does acknowledge that these games, comic books, TV, film, these stories that we share and these things we do together really should be celebrated in communities. And so I'm delighted to be able to come and talk to all of your students and community about that.
Yeah, we're so happy that you're coming too. I'm so glad that we get to be part of this, and I'm very much looking forward to your talk on March 9th. And I'll be there. I'll be bringing as many of my students as I can wrestle back onto campus at 7 o'clock.
Ta-da!
Thanks for your time today, Jen.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.